Pollination isn't something most of us think about on a day-to-day basis. It just goes on quietly in the background while we get to enjoy its literal fruits. With over 75% of the world's food crops and flowering plants reliant on pollinators, without them, we would all suffer. The frightening part is we're already losing pollinators at an alarming rate. The value of the ecosystem services provided by pollinators could conservatively be estimated to be in the tens or even hundreds of billions of pounds. But their true value extends far beyond the economic. There is an invisible extinction crisis, and the cost could be astronomical. Hi, I'm Dr. Eleanor Tufnell, an environmental scientist. Today I'm going to take you on a tour of the amazing world of pollinators and introduce you to its colourful cast of creatures. We'll then explore just what pollinators do and why they're so vital. Next we'll pivot to what threats pollinators face and which pollinators are at greatest risk. Finally, we'll cover ways that you can make a difference by protecting pollinators. Who are the pollinators? The term pollinator is applied to any creature that takes part in the transfer of pollen from the male stamen of a flower to the female stigma, either of the same or a different flower. When we think of pollinators, we tend to think primarily of bees and maybe butterflies, but a surprisingly wide array of creatures can distribute pollen. Pollinator insects include bees and butterflies, but also wasps and a variety of beetles and flies. Some insects are more occasional pollinators, such as lacewings and some true bugs. In Britain alone, we have over 1,500 pollinating species of insects. Throughout the world, certain birds, such as hummingbirds, are known to act as pollinators. As for mammals, many species of bats act as pollinators, and the Ethiopian wolf is also known to pollinate red hawk poker flowers. It is important to acknowledge the wide range of species that pollinate, as a fixation on only a small number of charismatic species, such as bees and butterflies, often leaves other pollinators, such as beetles, unprotected. While some pollinators are generalists, many are very specialist, and certain plants rely on them either heavily or exclusively. So saving just one species of pollinator is not enough. We need to protect them holistically. Ecosystems comprise a complex web of species and their interactions. And this includes man-made ecosystems such as agricultural areas. If we lose certain species, the knock-on effects would ripple outwards through the ecosystem's web, causing problems far beyond the immediate area. The importance of pollinators. Because of their role in pollinating crop plants, a major risk for us is that a deficit in crop pollination will lead to a drop in both quantity and quality of food, as well as biofuel crops. Different countries rely on different crops for both sustenance and trade, so regions that rely directly on pollinated crops are at greatest risk. Across 2/3 of the planet, the risk from crop yield instability is either serious or high. Pollinator-dependent food production has increased by up to 300% over the last 50 years, and their market value is in the billions of dollars. While some crop plants use other methods of pollination, such as wind dispersal, many are still reliant on pollinators. This includes most fruits, coffee, oilseed, many nuts, and even cocoa. Yes, no pollinators means no chocolate. Yes, I am as horrified by this as you are. Because different countries grow different crops and use different agricultural techniques, they will be affected differently by any deficit in pollination services. Most research has focused on comparatively wealthy parts of the world, such as Europe, which has seen a decline of 37% in bee species and 31% in butterflies. Crops such as strawberries and oilseed are at particular risk from pollinator decline. European managed pollinators, industrial beehives, have seen some challenges from disease, but are largely stable. However, in North America, managed pollinators have been hit hard by disease and colony collapse disorder, and crops such as apples and almonds, which depend on them, are at risk. In low-income regions, rural populations often rely heavily on wild-growing foods. So in parts of Africa, Asia-Pacific and Latin America, the biggest impact of pollinator decline is in wild plants. In Latin America, insect-pollinated crops include cashews, soybeans, cocoa, coffee, and these are essential both for regional food supply and international trade. The reliance of indigenous populations on pollinated plants means that they are at particular risk, and as pollinator species such as hummingbirds are an important part of oral culture and history, they risk losing more than just food sources. Another global region where pollinator decline poses a serious risk is Asia-Pacific. Both China and India rely heavily on fruit and vegetable crops, which require pollinators. And in some areas, these now require humans to pollinate them by hand, as native pollinators are no longer able to accomplish the task. Aside from food security, pollinators also contribute to the production of large numbers of non-food resources. These include medicines, textiles, particularly cotton, biofuels, and ingredients for cosmetic products. As I've already mentioned, pollinators such as bees and hummingbirds also hold an important place in many cultures. Their loss would also be a loss of great cultural and aesthetic value. Threats to pollinators. So now we understand what is at stake, it's time to examine just what is threatening pollinators, and how big of a threat are they really facing? Well, in recent decades, at least 3 species of bumblebee have become extinct. In a European Red List report, almost 1 in 10 species of wild bee are in danger of extinction. In the past 50 years, over half the bee, moth, and butterfly species studied have declined. There are a large number of threats to pollinators. Different species and different regions may face different threats. However, common and interrelated threats pop up time and again. Habitat destruction, land management practices, pesticides, and climate change. While humans have managed the land for millennia, the modern intensification of agriculture, particularly clearing large areas for grazing, overuse of fertilizers, and the use of monoculture farming, have led to habitat destruction and fragmentation. Unsurprisingly, insect pollinators are badly affected by the heavy use of pesticides and herbicides, which leave them particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change and disease. Habitat destruction, both from agricultural land and rapid urbanization, has meant many pollinators no longer have suitable foraging, breeding, and nesting sites. The quantity and quality of flowers suitable for these pollinators has declined, with modern farming practices reducing the amount of flowers on farming land. Traditionally managed flower-rich meadows are now rare. In places like the UK, we have a long history of hedgerows, and these often support wildlife and can act as corridors connecting habitat. But these aren't always sufficient, and in areas where massive monoculture dominates, there is little to no habitat for many specialist pollinators. Certain bumblebees and solitary bees, for example, collect nectar and pollen only from specific plants. So if those plants are no longer present, neither are the bees. Most pollinators, such as bumblebees and solitary bees, have quite specific needs for their nesting sites. The larvae of many hoverflies, butterflies, and moths often have very specific food plants and need the right conditions. While gardens may provide some foraging and nesting opportunities for many pollinators, the food plants for their larvae may be considered weeds and are either pulled up or poisoned with herbicide. Gardens that are designed for aesthetics or food may not prioritize native plants and may not take kindly to caterpillars eating their lettuces. Climate change has made things worse by adding extremes of temperature and fluctuations of rainfall. As the climate changes, the geographic ranges in which conditions are suitable for pollinating species shifts. The range of some bumblebees, butterflies, and moths have moved northward. However, while some migration can take place, combined with both habitat destruction and habitat fragmentation, it can be difficult for pollinators to colonize new areas. Pesticides in general, and insecticides in particular, can have devastating effects on pollinator populations, as well as wildlife generally. Weed killers remove food plants for herbivorous larvae, and prey species for pollinators that have predatory larvae. All pesticides have their impact, but of particular concern are systematic insecticides, because they end up in the plant's sap, nectar, and pollen. Honeybees have a few specific challenges, even in areas where managed hives are not in decline. In particular, the Varroa destructor, which is the rather epic-sounding name of a parasitic mite that feeds on honeybee larvae, pupae, and adults. Varroa can be treated, and beekeepers are encouraged to look out for it so that it can be treated quickly before the colony begins to struggle. Honeybees are also susceptible to a variety of fungi, bacteria, and viruses. Beekeepers must balance the need to spot an ailing hive early with the need to not overly stress the bees by inspecting too frequently. As one beekeeper explained to me, an inspection is like a major surgery. Even if all goes well, it's a stress on the body and takes time to recover. Which pollinators are most at risk? While all this may seem dire, some pollinators are doing better than others. Some bumblebees and solitary bee species are actually doing so well right now that their distribution in Britain has increased. Sadly, others have seen a sharp decline in their distribution in recent decades. Species that are able to collect nectar and pollen from a greater range of plants, particularly garden flowers, seem to be maintaining their numbers and distribution reasonably well. Species that are at most risk are those who are selective in their flower choices or have special requirements for nesting sites. Loss of habitat seems to be a greater challenge for butterflies and moths than for bees, and not a great deal is known about the distribution and abundance of many other pollinator species, such as hoverflies. Crowd favourites like bees and butterflies get all the funding. As mentioned before, outside of North America, managed honeybee populations are not under threat, and the number of maintained hives has even increased. Wild insect pollinators, however, are at particular risk. These are actually the main pollinators for many of Britain's insect-pollinated crops, but as they are reliant on the surrounding areas for nesting and year-round forage, they are vulnerable to habitat loss. How to help pollinators? Now we've established how important pollinators are and that they are at risk, let's talk about how we can help them. This can be broadly divided into several categories: personal gardening choices, research, broader policy changes, and our old friend collective action. If you have a garden, one of the best things you can do to help pollinators is to avoid using pesticides. And if you must spray, avoid spraying plants that are in flower. Try to plant a mix of native, nectar-rich plants, trees and shrubs that flower at different times of the year. If possible, leave sections of the garden wild to encourage wildflowers and provide both forage and nesting sites for pollinators. As I mentioned in my video on lawns, mowing less often, letting the grass remain higher, and allowing lawn weeds to grow has many positive effects on biodiversity, and this includes pollinator species. Providing a variety of nesting sites for pollinators is helpful. And you can also build a bee hotel, which is a container stuffed with hollow tubes of varying sizes, each of which has a dead end. Bee and bug hotels are also available to buy, so if your DIY skills aren't up to that challenge, do not fret. You can also avoid disturbing and destroying nesting sites, so areas of your garden with piles of dead leaves or branches can be left for nature to colonize. Pollinators need water, and providing it can be very easy. If you have a pond, make sure it has some shallow margins where they can safely drink. You can also fill a shallow dish with stones or marbles. This can be very decorative, then fill it with water. The stones give the pollinators somewhere to stand so they don't drown when they grab a drink. While not spraying can have downsides, it can also have some advantages. If you're growing soft fruits, fruit trees or vegetables such as runner beans, broad beans, courgettes, that's zucchini, marrows and tomatoes, etc., these will all benefit by an increased pollinator population. Sowing wildflowers in orchards was found to increase the abundance of insect pollinators, which led to a 20% increase in flower visitation, and in turn increased apple harvests. So adding flower habitat for insects can improve the yield of your crop, while helping to protect pollinators. I will need to do a video on ways to garden without insecticide, but some tips are companion planting, planting native plants, which are usually more resistant to native pests, and encouraging natural pest control, such as ladybirds and insect-eating birds. Hoverfly larvae feed on aphids, and adult hoverfly are often excellent pollinators, so they provide multiple services. A lot of research still needs to be done on pollinators, and here's where you can get involved. There are many monitoring schemes which monitor population changes and distributions. In the UK, these include the UK Pollinator Monitoring Scheme, or PoMS, wonderful name, which needs people to do a 10-minute flower insect timed count, which can be done anywhere, so even if you do not have a garden, you could do a survey in a local park. The Bumblebee Conservation Trust needs bee walkers, which sadly doesn't mean you'll get to take a giant dog-sized bumblebee out for a walk on a lead. I know, I'm disappointed too. But these bee walks can be fun and can really help monitor bumblebee numbers. These walks are along the same, fixed route monthly from March to October. And during these walks, the bee walker counts and identifies all bees they see. If bees aren't your cup of tea, how about a garden butterfly survey or a big butterfly count, which surveys and records butterflies both in gardens and elsewhere. I've included links to all of these in the description. I know they're very UK-centric, but odds are there are similar schemes in your area, so if you want to get involved, I'm sure they'll welcome volunteers. There are a lot of conservation-focused groups out there, and even if you can't spare the time to volunteer or money to donate, simply subscribing to their newsletter or following them on social media can be very useful. It lets you know of new research, new threats, and new campaigns. It means you can sign petitions and know what topics to write to your local representative about. Broader policy changes can be difficult to make happen, but control of pesticide usage, protection and expansion of habitat, and changes to land use can be achieved. We're stronger together, and working together, we can make a difference. Conclusion. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video on pollinators, and that you learned something new. The problem is a multifaceted one, and as such, the solution also needs to be. Without pollinators, a massive amount of our food, along with many other products, would disappear. But simple steps like tweaking how we garden can make a big difference. I hope I've inspired you on this topic. As always, I've left a library of links in the description for those who want to know more. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you'd subscribe so you can see further content. Likes, comments and shares are also greatly appreciated. So until next time, thank you for watching.